listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug. I return here with Jesse. We're sitting down here to have an honest, frank conversation about our daily activities building out Magento websites. We're constantly facing challenges, struggles, problems, and victories, and it's wonderful to be able to share those with you here with the goal that it makes you a better developer. So, Jesse, what are we going to talk about today?
Absolutely. It's great to be here. And, well, I think the first thing is to just briefly cover some of the things coming to Magento here on the horizon, on the near future. And one of those is 2.4.3. And we're getting closer to PHP 8 support, which will be a welcome addition. And it's great to see Magento working to integrate that into the platform.
Absolutely.
But you talked about some minor changes in 2.4.3?
Yes, reCAPTCHA. So they're adding reCAPTCHA to more pages, which is really good because not only does it help prevent carding attacks and just really obnoxious behavior across the website, for example, like customers being registered more than usual, and obviously that was taken care of on previous editions, but reCAPTCHA is good to implement. And Jesse, you know, it's funny. I'm looking at this picture of you in the recording, and you have quite the hairdo.
Yes, I did notice that. The plant is helping.
I think
my
I might
hairstyle.
go fix that here real quick.
All right, let's do it. Rebuilding the studio live.
Okay, that looks better. I could not get over seeing you with that extra tuft of fur coming out of your head, and it just did not look right. So, anyways, yeah.
Hairstyle 2.0.
I believe August 10th, 2.4.3 is released. So if you are a tech lead or a project manager, be marking your calendars because August 10th is going to be here in a jiffy, and it's time to get those websites updated. And yes, I know nobody likes to do these upgrades. It's just kind of a pain, but it's really important to keep the security at top notch. So
yeah, security is good. I think the other interesting thing that I'm not sure what I think about is, frankly, some of the third-party scripts that are associated with that. The reCAPTCHA JavaScript. If I remember correctly, it's like 150 kilobytes or something like that, which isn't nothing. Meaning it's at the point where it's going to take a browser some time to download it. Most internet connections won't be much of a problem, but it's also going to take a little bit of time to execute it. And it's just another thing kind of being loaded in that toolkit of everything in that kitchen sink. And it makes an impact. And like I said, the benefits are there, but there's also the downside too.
It's a good point. It's a good point because Magento is already known for being not necessarily ideal on the front end, and that's one reason we've talked about the Hoover theme regularly. It's because that seems to be fixing the problem on the front end. But yeah, do we really need another bunch of stuff coming in here that will ultimately slow the website down, even though it might be just a little bit. In the long run, lots of little bits adds up to be a lot of bits.
That's exactly the problem. Yep, that's right. That's right. But it also makes me think of something else that it'd be great to talk about today, and that's change. Because we mentioned PHP 8. There's a lot of new features coming in PHP 8. And a lot of things that some of us might be hesitant to fully embrace, even though they're there. And I think part of that reason is just from the aspect of change. And I know, speaking for myself as a person, I can be hesitant to change, just that aspect of learning new technology. And it's like, we're in the game of web development, which is a very fast-changing arena. But change is still hard.
It is. I remember when PHP 7 came out, it was kind of like this, driving a fancy new shiny car sort of thing. And yet I was shocked as far as how slowly people adopted it. Magento 2 pretty quickly came up to speed on at least support for it, and it took a while for it to actually start using the PHP 7 features, and of course they've long since dropped PHP 5, so of course PHP 7 is now fully the only thing that matters. And ultimately, yes, they're trying to determine whether they support 7 and when they cut that support window off in 8 versus that. So it's going to take some time to actually start seeing these PHP 8 features come into the system, but if nothing else, I think we're going to love the additional speed of the just-in-time compiler that PHP 8 brings, as well as some of the other. It's more syntactic sugar, but I think it's going to help us as developers build better applications in the long run.
Absolutely. And there is some nice features that will help us make our code look nicer. And that's not without benefit. Part of what we do is writing code for our future selves or our teammates in the future, things like that.
Right.
And so having code that looks nicer can be better. But it makes me think of a conversation I had just the other day with a young guy who is working on, is I would say oriented on a career towards development, programming, engineering of some sort. And he had spent a lot of time on an iPad previously and just got a computer, a MacBook.
Nice.
And so was working on that, but it was actually a little bit frustrated with the transition. Basically, he was talking about the way that he liked the iPad and the things that he liked about it. And I was telling him the benefits of the computer and the lack of limitations that there are on there versus the iPad. And the iPad's made progress, but it's still just not where Mac OS is. But it just made me think of that aspect. I think of our hesitancy to change. And this guy's bright. I tell you what, he is a sharp knife, and
well over 100 IQ.
Yeah, I mean he is a sharp knife, and I would love to be able to compare with him in terms of his intelligence. But even that was still difficult for him. Just that aspect of change. And so I think there's a couple things. It's good to give ourselves a little bit of space in that, but also to be willing to work at that change. Just
absolutely
accept it and embrace it and move past those things.
Well, and that's one thing I like about, I have a pull up on my screen here on Stitcher.io, a list of the new features in PHP 8. And just periodically reviewing that list, once you are able to jump onto PHP 8. For example, the null safe operator. Go look it up yourself. I won't necessarily explain it all, but the null safe operator is going to reduce the amount of code that you write. And remember, every single character that we write in code is technical debt. So the less we have to write, the better. And it's going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. So make sure to check that out, the null safe operator.
I learned about the null safe operator in JavaScript from a teammate, and it has blown me away with how awesome it is. And I'm thrilled that PHP is following JavaScript's footsteps on a number of these things, arrow functions, things like that, which are just amazing in JavaScript. You mentioned technical debt.
Yes.
What do you mean by technical debt, and why would you say that every line of code is technical debt?
It is my belief that, yes, every line of code that we write is technical debt. And the reason I say that is it's going to have to be updated at some point in the future. You could say at least most of it will have to be updated in one form or another. Magento 2.5 comes out, and that's going to happen. So all of our code in an ideal world, every line would be reviewed line by line. How is this working? Is this compatible? Is this still a good line? We don't live in an ideal world. It's never going to happen. We do that. So we might hopefully rely on integration tests. We would hopefully rely on, not as much, but QA, but they still have a very important role. Hopefully we are doing as much of our job as possible when it comes to quality assurance, i.e. by writing tests. But at the end of the day, code has been written. And it was funny. I have I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn post here, so it's probably will be out by the time you start listening to this podcast. We're recording on July 28th of 2021. But what's funny is in our project management system, it probably wouldn't hurt to say what it is, but I guess I'll just say I won't say it. You can probably, I've already mentioned it on the podcast at least at some point in the past. But there is this special feature that they included and that they reverted and that they've put back that basically allows you to sort the comments for a given work ticket. Well, I think it kind of ended up being defaulted back to newest to the top. And what struck me the other day is that when there's too many comments to render by default, it collapses them up, the ones at the top of the list up. Well, guess what? That just happens to be the newest comments first. So in order for me to see the comment that Jesse just left yesterday on a ticket, I have to go open the ticket, scroll to the somewhere in the middle of the page, because you have the description at the top, then you have the actual information below, the comments below that. And then I have to click a dumb button just to see the latest comments on there.
And wait 3 seconds while it loads.
Well, yeah, that's a given. But that's really what got my thinking on this, is that every bit of code that we write really is technical debt, even if it's a feature. Because that was a feature that was built, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago when we kind of saw that pop up. It was built a year or two ago, and it's getting in the way now. So, and it probably is a little bit extreme to say that, but I think at the end of the day, I think we would all agree that code leads to technical debt. So if we can minimize the amount of code we write, leverage existing features in the system, use syntactic sugar to write less code, at the end of the day, we're going to have our code is going to be easier to read. There's less code to debug, less code to maintain.
Absolutely. I don't think it's out of place to say that every line of code is some level of technical debt, from the standpoint that that's thinking down the road. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we have to worry about each individual line of code like, oh, I'm going to have to maintain this, 10 years from now. It's not that sort of thing. Yeah. It's like writing code today and thinking about where the project is going to be, mm-hmm. and the maintenance that will have to happen on that project. And that's why all of these other things that people talk about, like keeping your code dry, don't repeat yourself, DRY, those things matter, because then we have single places where stuff happens, where logic is calculated and there's control systems and things like that. Single places where those things happen.
Yeah.
Then in the future, when we go back, that technical debt is reduced because we don't have 5 copies of the same thing that does the same thing in different places.
Absolutely. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of our Ninja training at the beginning of July. It's absolutely 100% certain. And the bigger the project, the more of these paths that we start developing. Like, okay, there's going to ends up being 3 to 5, for example, ways to do this one similar thing. Whereas if we can abstract ourselves from this concept, we can think of, okay, how really should this be done? At the end of the day, we're going to be probably in a much, much better shape by even taking the extra time to re-architect some of those places that, it just stuff adds on to each other and keeps adding on and growing over time. And then you look back, it's like, oh man, that looks really bad. So taking that time to redo it. But I just realized we got off track here.
we did. But it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it is.
And there's so much that could be talked about there.
Yeah. But all that to say, we're coming back to talk about new things. And I think one of the dangers with new things, and it's a challenge for me, it's a challenge for all of us, I don't know if PHP 8 necessarily fits into this category, because I think the general consensus that I hear is that people are really excited about it. But at the end of the day, we still might be hesitant to pick up new features or even throw shade at new features before we have actually sat down and tried it out ourselves to make sure we really like that. And I think the whole named arguments conversation in PHP 8/Magento 2 really highlights that. Some people love it, some people hate it. But the reality is, I think few of the people that have actually used it and actually built modules, built websites, few of those people are talking about have actually built those modules to see whether they like it or not.
Meaning, the people who are criticizing sometimes haven't even worked with it.
Right, and as well as, I should be fair, people who are really excited about it on the other hand, right?
Yeah.
So it's not been vetted yet, and there's interesting conversation in the PHP, is it the RFC, about whether it's good or not, that sort of thing. But I in some ways, I think we should reserve conversation about it too much until we have used it, till we have vetted it and learned where it is helpful and perhaps where it is not helpful.
I think that's such a great point. I've certainly had conversations with people, and I won't deny that I've never been there myself. Having conversations
I've been there myself,
where we're inclined to complain about the technology that we're working on.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, for me, most of those times have been my lack of familiarity with the system. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of times where there's a legitimate reason to complain about something. There's things that we can probably all think of in Magento that, frankly, really aren't built the best way.
Oh, yeah.
There's problems with it and things like that. And in that case, it's like, okay, it's fair to complain, although maybe it's not the most healthy thing. I mean, honestly, it's like, well, we have to work with it anyways. And so it's like, what's the point of complaining? But, at least...
Well, and if I can interrupt you there, what's better than complaining is to fix it.
That's true.
And we've had some conversations internally about things that we can do to help improve aspects of Magento. And you're going to be seeing a lot more from us here over the coming weeks about some of these following up on some of these conversations. But yeah, if it's one thing to complain, and I don't want to be known as a complainer, but it's another thing to actually to be able to fix it and to provide real solutions there.
Yeah, and there's multiple things to consider in that as well, because it kind of goes back to that aspect of working with it versus not. Because the other thing that I see some people do is without having worked on something, they're like, oh, I don't know how that works, so I'm just going to build it the way that I'm used to.
That's right.
And I'm going to do it this other way because it's obviously better. And in some cases, they probably are right. But if they haven't taken that time to get familiar with what is already there, it's hard a little bit to say that. It's like, well, maybe is better, maybe isn't. But in some cases, it's probably not, because then other developers who go look at it, they're like, what happened here? And what are they doing here?
That's right.
I've definitely seen that in Magento modules that I've worked with, that are installed or something like that on a website, and be like, why do they do it this way?
That's right. And it goes back to every line of code we write is technical debt.
Yeah.
If we can leverage something in the system, that's going to be much more upgrade proof than what we write.
Yep.
That's not going to be upgrade proof, and we're going to have to come back and visit it later.
Yep. And it takes a team to work on those sorts of things. Like, yes, tech leads and senior developers can champion those sorts of causes, but everyone on the team plays a part in working to get their code to where it is as high quality in that sort of sense, where we're using things that are already there and things like that. But yeah, I definitely think it's a great point to kind of reserve judgment on technologies, on frameworks, on things like that until we've at least invested a little bit in there.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So I think it'd be good to move into our next segment. And that is talking about what we've been working on here recently, some of the difficult challenges we've come up against. And I've been I'm absolutely super excited about our Slack community. Go to swiftauto.com, I think /Slack. And we have a really vibrant community there talking about certifications. That's kind of how we got started, but people are just posting general difficult questions in there that they're up against. I do my best to help sort those problems out. Other people are jumping in, solving problems. So it's really, really vibrant. So I highly recommend you join that community. If you have questions, throw them on over and let's see how we do in helping you solve those problems. But Jesse, maybe you can walk me through one of your recent challenges you've faced and how you got around that.
Yeah. So there was an interesting one that came up maybe last week, and I was just about to hand something that I had built over to QA, and I noticed on the homepage they had this little carousel with some of their latest products or something like that, and it was super skinny, 50 pixels wide, and so all the text was squished, and it was that
doesn't look good.
Tall and skinny. It looked terrible. So I was like, maybe this is something related to dev. Maybe the content wasn't synced right or something like this. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I'll at least let QA know and see if they had seen it before. Nope, they hadn't. So I actually took it on and started looking at it, and it was on the homepage.
So not something you want to ship to production.
Exactly. So it turned out to be code on the homepage, and I'm looking at the page. And I'm like, what is causing this? And I start comparing this to production. I start to see classes and things like that. Look at the CSS selector on production that works and compare it to the one that is missing on dev, the staging environment. And I noticed that on production, there was this CMS index class that Magento would give to the body. On production, it was there, but on dev, it was missing.
Nice.
So this particular CSS selector just wasn't showing up because it wasn't working. So that made me think, well, why wouldn't that class be present? So I jump into the view source, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but view source is different than the DOM. If you open up developer tools, you can see something there.
Right.
But it's been processed, like the Magento text /x Magento init script tag is the most obvious example of that, because those are actually removed. So they'll be present in the view source, but they're not present in the DOM. typically if the page is loaded. So I look there and I see a script tag that is all messed up right above the body tag that is open and that says the body tag opens, it has no classes assigned to it.
Oh, man.
So I jump into the code there, and it turns out a third-party module had recently shipped an update that caused it was a security enhancement, but they ended up double escaping the URL for their script tag. And so there was more quotes than needed to be there.
That's crazy.
And it made the rest of the page kind of get messed up because the DOM didn't know how to process that as it rendered the page. What was more confusing though too is that there wasn't, like, when I went to that GitHub repository where that third-party code was, the updates weren't clear there. And the only way that I did it was the only way I identified that update was the problem was by downloading this specific release tag associated with what I discovered was in the project. So I went into Composer lock file. I found the exact version that our repository was on, and was able to verify it in there, because I was like, why is it just on our project like this, but in GitHub it looks like it is going to work just fine,
right?
Which I was like, at first I was like, is this a security breach? Like, did somebody, like, you hear every now and then of those things where someone takes on NPM or something like that and injects a malicious package in there. So I'm like, why is our code different than what's on GitHub? Because I looked at the GitHub branch and it should have been there, but it wasn't. And so by working through those things, it was amazing to me, just in thinking back. Like, there was a minor release, a bug fix release in a third-party module that caused a slider to break on our client's website. That's happened
crazy.
And it's like, how far away from that is it? And yet ultimately, the fix was relatively simple. Like, going through those steps, just one at a time, looking at, okay, what would cause this? What would cause that? And I opened a ticket that was very clear. Here was my steps. And this is what I found. This was the problem. I submitted a patch, also a Composer patch, that would fix that problem as well. And they're going to get it fixed. But it was a great, like, train of troubleshooting and fun from that aspect to, like, okay, got it, fixed it, figured it out.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it was crazy, and got it fixed, and it's good to go.
Cool. That's and that's the thing. It's not always the. I call that a gateway. I mean, some people use the term gateway drug, but this is like a gateway bug, right? So it looks like it's going to be something, a front end issue. Okay, great. I need to go look at the JavaScript. No, we got it being open-minded and trying other things. And then that's where, like, the whole TAD framework comes in really helpful, because, okay, let's say you did spend, I don't know how long you spent on this, but let's say you spent 2 hours or an hour working on, okay, well, why is the slider shrunk down? And you're working through the code line by line, but at the end of the day, you do a reset, you skip the attempt to fix because maybe it's not working or something, then you jump to do it again. You're back to the first acronym, take an inventory. And take an inventory, you're saying, okay, well, maybe I should take a different approach. And the important thing here is the documentation, because if the more you can document, and let me grab this. I've been fighting. I was fighting an issue here this week. Well, and actually, I'll walk through this here. I guess I'll take a turn. There's a couple of issues I've really fought. I don't know. I just heard this morning this issue might not be set, so I might be a little preliminary in talking about it. But I think.
But let me interrupt you real quick here too. So, like you said, there are some issues that you're having trouble with. You're not getting. There's some that you think you fixed. You send them to.
I hate those.
I just hate those. Right? Things like that. But for any junior developers listening to this podcast right now, take heart. Right? Because you've been doing this for 10 plus years. You know Magento very comfortably. All of that. So for junior developers or middle or senior developers, it doesn't matter. This is life, and it's okay. Accept the challenge. Keep going. Don't take no for an answer. But it happens to everybody. It is the way that it works, and you can do it. You can solve it.
This is what you signed up for. Sorry, but it's true. Fighting bugs. And again, that's why, there's just so little information in the market about how to fight bugs, and that's why I've been so excited about the book here. But anyways, we have had a situation where in Magento, when a customer adds stuff to their cart, they log in, then their logged in customer cart is merged with the not logged in customer cart. So that would be, in Magento terminology, that would be two quotes are merged together. A quote would be associated with the logged in customer. So they're on their phone. They added some products to their cart. Now they're on their desktop. They add some more products to their cart, but they're not logged in yet. When they go log in, those quotes are merged. So on this particular project, we have a good bit of information that's attached to this. And what we are finding is this attached information, we're using extension attributes and in a separate many-to-many table to associate these quote items with these other types of records. And what I was finding, though, is that through this process, products were losing that association. And it's pretty difficult to try to replicate this. I actually got it down pretty quick to as quick as possible, but you had to log in, log out, add a product to the cart, make sure you clear out your cart on the logged in side, add a product to the cart. It was a real pain.
That would be tremendously painful.
It was terrible. So that's where I built create an integration test, which seemed to mostly help. And that's probably the biggest disadvantage with integration tests, or the problem with them, is that it doesn't necessarily capture all the variables, everything that's happening. It's good at testing a specific situation, but if you're not aware of everything that's happening, it's not necessarily the best indicator to reproduce a problem. And that's where I struggled with that for a little while. I got a passing integration test, but I had to set up a whole bunch of stuff. I had to use to create two fixtures, one for quote number one for quote number two, all the associated information. There was a lot of work there. But at the end of the day, notes are what has helped me work through this problem. And I'm not going to say I'm done with it just because I heard from QA just this morning that it might not be set. But I was getting so confused working through, okay, why is this product showing up here? What's the ID for it? Oh, well, was that the ID that was there previously? No, just take a moment, take your notepad out and write stuff down on it. And it gave me the perspective as far as what's going on. And I was able to find a problem. It might not be the final problem, but I was able to find a big problem with that, with our merging strategy, and got that and have that solution out on production now. And so I'm going to have to go review that. But these notes totally cleared my mind out, which kind of ties in what we talked about. Was it the last time we talked about problems and that whole queuing and indexing problem that we've had? And actually I have an update for that too. But yeah.
It's interesting. Your comment about notes. The human mind can only retain so much information,
and mine's especially limited.
One of the things that we do as developers is create a map of what we're working on in our minds, and we kind of assemble pieces together over time. The problem is that we can still only hold so much. The other problem is that it can actually feel stressful to us if we have too much in that bucket or in those collection of buckets. And so writing notes makes sense because it allows us to store some of the information out there in plain text. That way we don't have to worry about keeping it in our in our minds and remembering it during that time, but it's still just right at reach. Like we can just scan those notes and see them. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that you found that helpful in that process. But I also liked how you talked about integration tests too. And the reminder that integration tests aren't just for QA. They're not just for reducing technical debt. They're not just for helping the application run reliably. There can actually be some very practical uses in speeding up development, for instance.
Absolutely. And I definitely found that. And I think one thing is, and the reason I bring up this notes here as well is I've used scratch pads a lot on my computer. Like in PHP Storm has this scratch, I think they call it a scratch pad, I think. Use Sublime Text just to jot notes down. But what I find is it's like this becomes like a separate monitor for me, and it's also saved forever. My problem is I'm notorious for storing stuff in Sublime and then trashing it later because I get too many tabs open, versus in my notebook here I have notes from quite a ways back as far as what I've been thinking about, my processes and all that. I've just started using this a lot more lately. So
that is great. And I've seen plenty of developers with just tons of tabs open and things like that. And honestly,
you're probably looking at me then.
Well, to some extent, yeah, probably. But still, like, I'm not saying that's bad. Like, some people can do that, and that's fine. But I know for me, having a clean workspace does make a difference.
It does.
And so I like what you're talking about in like this notes. And what this is like you're mostly concerned about today's notes and yesterday's notes and that sort of thing. You don't need like some sort of inventory of notes to where you can go find this specific document from, last December or something like that. That's not
true.
the primary purpose of this, because if so, then you wouldn't be able to search it and things like that.
That's right.
But it does provide that information that is here at hand and readily accessible.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah, it's just kind of a scratch pad working through instead of math problems or algebra problems back in the good old days of school, where we are doing this here on the problems that we're solving on a daily basis. So I think that's might wrap it up today. I show we're about 30 minutes into this. And that's usually where we like to call it quits. There is more I could talk about. In fact, I have a crazy problem with sort orders in MySQL that I will love to talk about, and I'll have to make sure to take a note, and we'll talk about that next time, because that's pretty crazy. But then again, I also might just slip that into this course that I'm building for the art of e-commerce debugging, and I'm really excited about that. So anyways, if you have not already, please do review Smash the Bug podcast on your favorite podcast syndication platform, whether that's Apple or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. You're pretty much where you're going to listen to podcasts, you'll find us there. Or if you want to watch us in video form, I would like to think we're engaging, and I guess I will leave that up to you to decide whether we're engaging or person, or better just to listen to on your headphones. But that you can go to Swift Otter channel on YouTube, and you will be able to find us there. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Make sure to that you don't lose out on forthcoming episodes. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, Jesse. Thank you for coming on, and actually coming over and joining on this podcast here today.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to chat.